The courtroom sat in complete silence, but it wasn't the normal kind of silence people expected before Judge Judy entered. This one felt heavy, tense, almost uncomfortable, as though everyone in the room already sensed that something about the case was deeply wrong. At the plaintiff's table sat 14-year-old Emily Turner, small and trembling, her hands locked tightly together in her lap while her shoulders curled inward like she wanted to disappear from the world entirely. Beside her sat her mother, Sarah Turner, exhausted and worn down, with eyes that looked as though sleep hadn't touched them in days. Every few seconds, Sarah glanced nervously toward the parking officer seated across from them, unable to believe that a simple evening mistake had somehow dragged her child into a courtroom. Across the aisle sat Officer Daniel Price. His arms were folded confidently across his chest, posture relaxed, expression cold and smug. To someone who knew nothing about the case, he looked like a man calmly doing his job. But anyone who had actually examined the file saw something very different. They saw a man who had forgotten what responsibility and fairness were supposed to mean. And when Sarah's anxious eyes met his, he gave the faintest smirk, a tiny expression of arrogance that immediately sent unease through the audience. Then the courtroom door opened. Judge Judy entered with slow, deliberate steps, each one echoing sharply enough to tighten the tension already hanging in the room. She placed her folder on the bench without opening it. Instead, she studied both sides carefully in silence, her gaze lingering longer than usual. Finally, her eyes settled on Officer Price, who still leaned back with that same careless confidence. The look on Judy's face changed instantly. It was subtle but unmistakable. The expression of someone who had already read something in the case file that disturbed her deeply. Yet she said nothing at first. Instead, she turned toward the young girl. "State your name," Judy said calmly, though her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who tolerated no dishonesty. "Emily Turner," the girl answered softly. "How old are you, Emily?" 14. The moment she heard it, Judy's jaw tightened ever so slightly. 14, she repeated slowly, almost like the number itself was evidence against the officer sitting across the room. Then she nodded once. "All right, let's begin." But even before the facts were fully explained, everyone watching could already sense the truth. None of this felt normal. A child sat in court over a parking citation she barely understood. A struggling mother had been financially crushed by what should have been a simple misunderstanding, and the officer responsible had doubled down instead of admitting the obvious. The atmosphere inside the courtroom mirrored the pressure that had been building inside Emily's life for weeks, stress piling higher and higher until something finally broke. Still, Judge Judy remained calm. She didn't rush to conclusions. She didn't speak emotionally. She hadn't even opened the folder yet when she asked her first question. "Mrs. Turner," she said evenly, "why are you here today?" Sarah swallowed hard before answering. "Your Honor, my daughter received a parking ticket while she was waiting for me in the car. She didn't break any law. She wasn't driving. She was just sitting there doing exactly what I told her to do." Her voice cracked slightly. "And that ticket caused more damage to our lives than you can imagine." Something shifted in Judy's posture the instant those words left Sarah's mouth. She leaned forward slightly, fingers clasped together. "Let's make something very clear," Judy said. "A 14-year-old was sitting inside the vehicle?" Emily spoke quietly. "Yes, Your Honor, you were driving." "No, I was in the passenger seat. The car was turned off. And you were alone?" "Yes." "Your mother instructed you to stay there?" "Yes." "And you followed those instructions?" "Yes." The room fell silent again. Judy finally opened the file sitting in front of her. But instead of immediately reading through the paperwork, she stared down at the thick stack of documents for several long seconds before speaking. "This case," she said carefully, "is not about a parking ticket." Her eyes lifted toward Officer Price. "This case is about judgment." She paused. "And from what I've seen so far, a 14-year-old child was punished for trying to stay safe, while an adult failed to use basic common sense." Her gaze sharpened directly onto the officer. "And I intend to find out why." The audience leaned forward immediately. Emily held her breath. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, and for the first time since the hearing began, Officer Price's smirk disappeared. Everything was beginning to change. To understand why Judge Judy reacted so strongly the moment she saw Emily sitting in that courtroom, you have to go back to the night everything started. It hadn't been dramatic. There were no flashing lights, no violent arguments, no warning signs that disaster was coming. It was simply an ordinary Tuesday night that slowly turned into the kind of situation that reveals how quickly life can fall apart when small decisions collide with the wrong authority figure at the wrong moment. Sarah Turner had already finished her diner shift later than expected because another employee failed to show up. She couldn't leave until the tables were cleaned and the register was balanced. By the time she finally clocked out, the November night had grown bitterly cold. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat doing homework beneath the dim glow of the dashboard lights while her mother drove. Both of them were exhausted, the kind of exhaustion only people living paycheck to paycheck truly understand. But before heading home, Sarah needed to stop at the grocery store for two simple things: milk and headache medicine. Without them, the next morning would become another disaster waiting to happen. The parking lot was crowded. Trucks blocked multiple spaces, and every open spot disappeared almost immediately. Sarah circled the lot twice, hoping for something closer to the entrance so Emily wouldn't have to walk through the freezing air. Nothing opened up. Finally, checking the time and thinking about the chores still waiting at home, Sarah made a quick decision. "Stay here, sweetheart," she told Emily softly. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anybody. I'll only be a few minutes." This wasn't unusual for them. Emily hated crowded stores late at night, and Sarah always believed her daughter was safer waiting inside a locked car than wandering through a busy grocery store alone. What happened next changed everything. Over the following weeks, the situation spiraled badly. Sarah couldn't immediately afford the ticket payment, which triggered additional late fees. Then came processing fees. Then a bank overdraft penalty after one charge hit earlier than expected. By the end of the month, the original $150 citation had exploded into more than $300. Emily heard every stressful conversation. Every exhausted sigh, every whispered discussion about bills, every late-night moment when her mother sat with a calculator trying to figure out how they would survive the month. The guilt destroyed her. She apologized constantly for something that had never been her fault. She became quiet at school. She stopped laughing with friends. She stopped drawing. Little by little, she stopped acting like a child. The night Sarah found Emily crying beneath her blanket, whispering, "I ruined everything," she realized she couldn't let this continue. Then a coworker overheard Sarah crying on the phone and gave her one piece of advice. "Take this to somebody who still believes in common sense," the woman said. "Send it to Judge Judy." This time Sarah listened. She mailed everything: the ticket, the rejected appeals, photos of the parking sign. Every document connected to the case. Weeks later, she received a call from Judge Judy's producers saying they wanted to hear it. For the first time in months, Sarah felt hope again. What Sarah and Emily didn't know when they walked into the courtroom was that Judge Judy's team had already been investigating the case extensively behind the scenes. They had reviewed municipal regulations, cross-checked records, examined Officer Price's citation history, and Judy, after spending decades hearing excuses that didn't add up, immediately sensed something worse than simple incompetence, something rotten. The moment Sarah finished explaining the situation, Judy's attention locked directly onto Officer Price. "Officer Price," she said evenly, "I have several questions for you." He straightened slightly in his chair. Trying to maintain confidence, Judy lifted a document from the file. "This citation states that the driver refused to move the vehicle, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," he answered quickly. "And you stand by that statement?" "Yes." Judy leaned forward. "The driver you're referring to was 14 years old." A hesitation flashed across his face. Yes, the person inside the vehicle refused to move. The person inside the vehicle," Judy snapped sharply, "was a child." The courtroom froze. "A child who legally cannot operate a car," Judy continued. "A child incapable of moving that vehicle even if she wanted to." Officer Price tried recovering. "Well, Your Honor, the law doesn't mention age. The car was parked in a no-standing zone." Judy stared at him coldly, long enough for the silence itself to become uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke. "Officer Price, I'll give you one opportunity to correct yourself. Either you failed to understand what you were documenting, or you intentionally wrote the report in a misleading way because you didn't want to admit you issued a citation to a minor. Which is it?" His jaw tightened. "I followed protocol." Judy let out a sharp laugh filled entirely with disbelief. A yes, the favorite excuse of people who stop thinking for themselves. She flipped another page. "Your protocol also appears to involve issuing nearly identical citations in the same area dozens of times over the past several months." She held up multiple documents. "Some of these tickets were written less than a minute apart. Would you like to explain how you supposedly evaluated each situation individually in under 30 seconds? A murmur spread across the courtroom. Officer Price's face began turning red. "I'm efficient," he muttered. "Efficient?" Judy repeated incredulously. "That's one description. Reckless is another. Careless works too." She tapped the stack of citations sharply. "What I see is a pattern of issuing as many tickets as possible without caring about the actual circumstances." Then she turned toward Emily. "And in this case, that pattern crossed the line." Emily lowered her eyes, still overwhelmed by the attention, but Judy wasn't finished. "Mrs. Turner," she asked, "how long were you inside the grocery store?" 7 minutes, Sarah answered. "I checked the receipt time. I only bought milk and headache medicine, and the car was turned off?" "Yes." "And your daughter remained alone following your instructions?" "Yes." Judy slammed the file shut so hard the sound echoed through the courtroom. "Officer Price," she said slowly, "you issued a citation to a frightened child. You documented her as a driver despite knowing she was a minor. You ignored the reality of the situation entirely." He tried speaking again, but Judy cut him off instantly. "You didn't use judgment, you didn't use decency, and you certainly didn't use common sense." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. For the first time since arriving, Emily looked directly at Judge Judy, and the fear in her face began giving way to something fragile but powerful. Hope, but Judy was only beginning. The courtroom tension intensified when Judy opened the file again and removed another set of papers. The moment Officer Price saw the heading at the top of the document, the color drained from his face completely. "Internal Affairs." "Officer Price," Judy said quietly, "did you believe I only reviewed this citation?" He swallowed hard. "I followed the law, Your Honor." "Wonderful," Judy replied sharply. "Then explaining this should be easy." She lifted the report. "Are you familiar with complaint number 427B involving a disabled mother you cited last month?" His expression shifted instantly. "That investigation was unresolved," he muttered. "Unresolved?" Judy repeated, another word for ignored. The room went completely silent. "According to this complaint," Judy continued, "you issued a citation to a disabled woman unloading groceries despite her visible disability placard. Conveniently, your body camera was turned off." Gasps spread through the audience. Judy lifted another report. "And this complaint involves a delivery driver who collapsed from heat exhaustion beside his truck before receiving a citation from you. Then another." and this one concerns a pregnant woman who pulled over after becoming dizzy and was later transported to the hospital by ambulance. She stared directly into him. Do you remember her? Officer Price couldn't answer. Sweat formed visibly across his forehead as the courtroom watched him unravel. Then Judge Judy delivered the truth plainly. You have a pattern, she said firmly, a pattern of targeting vulnerable people. Women, elderly citizens, disabled individuals, children, people you assumed would never fight back. Her voice rose slightly. You issue citations first and think later. Then she looked toward Emily. And this child became your next easy target. Emily's eyes filled with tears again. Judy turned back toward Sarah. What financial damage did this citation cause your family? Sarah took a shaky breath. Your Honor, after the late fees and penalties, it became nearly $400. That's almost an entire week of groceries for us. Judy's face hardened. A 14-year-old caused none of this, she said. What caused this was reckless enforcement from someone who forgot that authority is supposed to serve people, not intimidate them. Then came the ruling. This court finds the citation void. All associated fees are void. And the conduct displayed by Officer Price is completely unacceptable. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs, but Judy still wasn't done. Officer Price, she continued firmly, I am forwarding this case and these complaint records to Internal Affairs with a formal recommendation for disciplinary review. His entire expression collapsed. Your Honor, please. No, Judy interrupted immediately. You do not get sympathy now. You chose power over fairness. You chose intimidation over responsibility. And you chose a frightened 14-year-old child as your target. She leaned forward. Actions have consequences. Emily broke into tears as Sarah wrapped her arms around her tightly. Then Judy's voice softened completely. Emily, she said gently, listen to me carefully. The girl looked up. You did nothing wrong. Emily nodded through tears. This was never your fault. It was the kind of sentence a child carries forever. The entire courtroom finally exhaled. Sarah whispered, "Thank you," over and over again. Judge Judy nodded once. Case dismissed. The gavel struck loudly, and the moment it did, something extraordinary happened. The audience rose to its feet instinctively. A standing ovation filled the courtroom. Not just for Judge Judy, but for a frightened child and a mother who refused to stop fighting for her. Emily buried her face against her mother's shoulder, overwhelmed with emotion, while Sarah mouthed silent words of gratitude again and again. And Judge Judy simply leaned back in her chair calmly, looking like a woman who had fulfilled exactly what she was meant to do: protect people who could not protect themselves.